The ties between Trump and Putin tested once again as the U.S. president says he's not happy with his Russian counterpart.
Mr. Trump spoke against President Putin's massive missile and drone attack on Ukraine and has now raised the prospect of imposing more sanctions on Moscow. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy earlier criticized the U.S. and the international community for staying silent after Russia unleashed what Kyiv describes as the largest aerial assault since the war started.
At least 13 people have been killed and dozens injured. Mr. Zelenskyy says more than 30 Ukrainian cities and villages, including Kyiv, were targeted by some 367 drones and missiles.
And for more on what's happening with the Ukraine war, let's speak now with Aurel Braun. He's Professor of International Relations at Toronto University. He's also Center Associate at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard. Professor Braun, good to have you back on the show. So not for the first time, Donald Trump says he's not happy with Vladimir Putin. I want to ask you about the language that he used. I mean, he spoke as though he was unhappy with a friend as opposed to being unhappy with the behavior of a statesman. Can you tell us if this represents a shift, after so many months of diplomatic efforts?
It is the hope of many allies of the United States that this indeed would be a shift, that in a sense, Mr. Trump would be mugged by reality, that he would come to understand that Vladimir Putin, in fact, has been playing him all along, that Vladimir Putin is not interested in real settlement. But if you look at the language, and I think you were entirely correct when you said this was almost as if speaking about a friend. I am not happy. Contrast that with the language that he used in terms of allies in Western Europe, or the brutal put down that Mr. Trump engaged in the Oval Office in February when Mr. Zelenskyy, the democratically elected president of Ukraine, was visiting. So I think the hope is not policy. And we have not seen a change in Mr. Trump's policies towards Russia, not so far. This is not to say that it may not come in the future, but for the moment, he seems to be driven by at least two major goals, Mr. Trump. One is that somehow in negotiations, he could persuade Vladimir Putin to switch away from China, switch alliances towards the United States. The United States could then concentrate on China. And second, Mr. Trump, as a mercantile, transactional president, also has talked repeatedly about these phenomenal opportunities for trade and investments in Russia. I'm afraid that both of these are fantasies, and they are not going to come about.
Okay, but Mr. Trump did say that he would absolutely consider imposing additional sanctions on Russia, although he's been warning Putin since March, but so far we haven't seen an action. It hasn't followed his words. Professor, if he does indeed slap sanctions on Russia, will it likely to alter Putin's calculations?
In a sense, when we look at Vladimir Putin, it's a glass half full and a glass half empty. It is half full because he seems to, at one level, project a confidence that he can win in Ukraine, and this is why he's not negotiating seriously, except demanding what essentially amount to terms of surrender from Ukraine. On the other hand, one could look at it in a different way and say this is also an act of desperation. He seems to want to knock Ukraine out before major sanctions could be leveled at him, before the Europeans begin the massive rearmaments that they're committed to, before Mr. Trump switches his approach and begins to impose serious sanctions. And yes, if the United States were to join the Europeans, who now have said that they are going to up sanctions, and they have already moved to, in some limited but not insignificant ways, to increase sanctions, for example, against the shadow fleet, something like 200 of the 800 ships that Russia uses to move oil and break sanctions, that could be very powerful because the Europeans cannot do it alone. The United States has to be engaged in using secondary sanctions against those countries that violate the first sanctions. So an American involvement would send a powerful message and would have also an immediate economic effect on a Russian economy that, in fact, is very weak. A Russian economy that is unidimensional, a Russian economy that is suffering high inflation, and a Russia that now is in the fourth year of a war, almost as long as the Second World War involvement of Russia, and they haven't won. And even though Ukraine is not winning, in Russia, almost 1 million people have already left, and Russian casualties add up to almost 1 million as well.
Okay, Professor, just looking at Putin's actions of late, the largest prisoner swap, but also coinciding with its most intense aerial bombardment of Ukraine. What does this sort of dual combination approach tell you about Putin's strategic objectives and messaging to Kyiv and the international community?
Vladimir Putin has learned, some other leaders have learned, that it's not wise to get into a direct confrontation with Mr. Trump. And perhaps Vladimir Putin has been better than most at manipulating Mr. Trump. So in many ways, what Vladimir Putin has been doing is that he has been saying essentially no to Mr. Trump, no to the 30-day ceasefire that Mr. Trump demanded, no to the ceasefire in terms of naval forces in the Black Sea, no to not hitting infrastructure. But he also tries to make a no sound like a yes. So the prison exchange is something that, of course, in terms of the lives of those individuals who are being released, is significant. But in the larger strategic picture, he's not conceding much, Mr. Putin, but he's trying to, at the same time, try to convey that he is cooperative. And what in reality, he has really been using a hard no on all the important demands of Mr. Trump and of the Western allies.
Right. Professor Braun, I want to, go back to the point you were making earlier about the fantasies, that Trump may be holding, which is Russia's realignment with the United States against China and some sort of a huge deal. If neither happens, do you think Trump is going to continue with his current approach, which is like, sit back and you two work it out, and then when you have something worked out, maybe I'll come in again?
It is an extremely, and in a sense, unanswerable question at the moment, because Mr. Trump can change his mind so quickly and has done it so repeatedly. The reason I say this is pure fantasy is because Russia is a junior partner to China. It is too dependent, too indebted to China, too vulnerable, moving towards being a vassal state. There's no way that they can switch away from China, or that China would allow them to do that. Secondly, in terms of all these golden, great, vast economic and trade opportunities, they just simply do not exist in the case of Russia. Russia's economy in nominal terms is only the size of Italy's, but not anywhere nearly as efficient, diverse, or competitive. They have no viable business law or independent courts. So those investments are just not going to happen anywhere on the scale that Mr. Trump is expecting or fantasizing about it. Now, will Mr. Trump come to the realization that he has been wrong, that he has been played? And if he tries to walk away from this and let others do it, and he also already hinted that perhaps the Pope should negotiate, then there's a subsidiary question, and that is, what does that exactly mean? Would the United States walk away by not engaging in negotiation, or would they walk away by withdrawing military support for Ukraine? And that would be devastating, because even though the Europeans are moving now really expeditiously to try to build up or rebuild their military forces, it takes a significant amount of time to scale up. So in a way, the United States has to provide the bridging until the Germans in particular, who are now massively going to spend on the military, can provide the help that was subsidy for the United States. For the next year or two, there is no really American substitute. So it would be disastrous if Mr. Trump would throw in the towel, but also withdraw military help from Ukraine. And the allies would oppose that, but we just don't know with Mr. Trump. We don't know at what stage Mr. Trump will understand that this is an interconnected international system, that being allied with the European states, with Canada, is essential, that what happens in the case of Ukraine reverberates not only in Europe, but also in Asia. And therefore, in many ways, he cannot afford to allow Ukraine to be thrown under the bus.
Okay.
That realization hopefully will come, but at the moment we are just not sure.
Plenty of uncertainties out there. Professor Braun, I'm afraid I have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for your time this morning. Aurel Braun, a professor of international relations at the University of Toronto.